Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
And I'm joined by Jim Engstrand, who's running as a Republican. He's from Milwaukee, and he is running to represent the 28th Senate District. Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate the opportunity to say hello to you and the constituents of the 28th.
So I was reading about you that you grew up on a dairy farm. What do you think should be done to try to help Wisconsin dairy farmers who are struggling right now?
You know, the dairy industry has always been a tough economy in its sector. I still have a brother that does a traditional family farm. One of the things that I think has been very helpful with some of the farms that I worked on as a young man in high school and college, and then throughout the years have sort of studied, and that is either the economy of scale where you grow your farm a little bit larger and have more animals, and you can go ahead and buy a bigger volume of materials and supplies. And then the other thing is really diversification. If you're into crops and you're into livestock and you have a good diversity, when the market is up in one, it might be down in another, and that can kind of offset it. But I do believe one of the things that's been very instrumental in farms is actually bringing for especially dairy, is bringing the entire process and actually producing your milk so you can sell it direct instead of having a middleman. It helps on the expenses. It gives you a better price. And in talking to Quick Trip, I talked to them 2 weeks ago about the dairy industry. One of the things they're doing is they're going ahead and doing partnerships with local farmers where they, instead of having a middleman process it, they sell directly to Quick Trip and get a better rate. So I think there's a couple things there that can be done among the private sector, and potentially some of the regulatory issues that Wisconsin has on farmers, they could be looked at and perhaps made a little bit easier on the farmer, and especially these times where the COVID has kind of interrupted the supply chain.
Thank you. The governor has warned that tax collections could fall dramatically this year, possibly by as much as $2 billion. What would you do to address that shortfall? Would you cut government spending, or would you try to raise taxes and fees to offset the loss?
I think one of the things that we've sort of gotten away from, and we always look, at the revenue part of the budget to see how can we raise more revenues. I'm sort of the belief we haven't taken a look at, especially in times like this where we're really having to tighten our belt. We really need to look at what are the expenses first that we can cut. There's always some ability to optimize the revenue coming in and to look at your expenses and shave off this or that. And maybe instead of doing something, right away this year in 2020 or 2021, let's look at that project maybe in 2022, stuff like that. Because I believe if we don't keep our spending in check, it just snowballs and continues to grow. And so I would take a look closer at what expense issues are out there that we can maybe curb, and then look at your revenue. Where are there some revenue opportunities? And I'm not in favor of raising taxes. I think there's a lot of work we can do in terms of cutting expense, especially in some of our governmental sector. There's always opportunities. I spent 27 years in the military, and even in a military budget, there is ability to find expenses that are unnecessary or repetitious.
Who do you think should draw the next set of district maps? I know Governor Evers has started his People's Maps Commission. Obviously, the Republicans who control the legislature believe they're the ones who should draw the maps. Who do you think should be the one in charge of that?
Well, Mary, I look at it this way. We've actually gone to court over these lines in the past, and a panel of jurists sat down and looked at it, and they kept it the way the system was. Whenever you get a political party, I don't care if it's the Democrat or the Republican Party or whatever party, they're always going to want to try and get that drawing favorable to their party. Obviously, if you can gerrymander a district to come out a certain way, then it's going to be beneficial to that particular party in power. My thought on this, and I've said this before historically, why don't we just draw squares, and as we need to encompass more population to make up a district, we expand the square. Rather than all these gerrymandered amoeba-looking districts, let's do it that way. And one of the things to keep in mind when we're talking about districts and drawing them, a lot of people that are on the progressive side of the aisle, a lot of times they sort of are attracted to the more metropolitan area. And a lot of times you'll find that conservative, more traditional type of people will live maybe not quite in the urban area as much, but more outstate. So you're never going to be able to really force people to live in a certain environment or draw a district enough in a way that can really make it equal, so to speak. So my theory would be, let's make squares, and each district you increase the size of the square till you have the population required.
All right, thank you. One other issue that's come up a lot is medical marijuana, recreational marijuana. Obviously, it's been legalized in places like Illinois, where they're seeing a lot of sales. Do you support legalizing either medical and or recreational marijuana?
I don't, and the reason I don't support that is I look at, let's take a similar stimulant that's not illicit or not a drug, so to speak, like coffee. You know, we all love our coffee, right? We probably all started out drinking, one a day maybe, and it kind of tasted good, but it gave us something that we craved more of. And then we started to have maybe 2 or 3 if we go to Starbucks. Or maybe if you're a regular black coffee drinker like I am, you might start out with a cup and then you do a pot and now you're up to 2 pots. Well, marijuana is a gateway type of substance. And my understanding about medical marijuana, I have no problem doing research on stuff that, may have a cure factor, but my understanding there are other type of treatments, if you will, that meet and exceed what they're getting currently out of medical marijuana. Now, if you're talking about the ointments and the oils, I'm okay with that. I think that has some therapeutic effect for joints and pain and that, so to speak. But I don't believe the medical marijuana side is something we should do, just because it also, if you look at Colorado, for example, Colorado was one of the first ones. One of the reasons they expressed interest was tax revenue. Well, the tax revenue didn't rise to the extent or the level that provided them what they needed. And in fact, it was offset by the crime that followed it, and then the required additional policing and convictions and things like that were required.
What do you think should be done to address the racial inequalities and disparities that we've seen in Milwaukee and throughout Wisconsin? Do you have any proposals that you think could address that?
So I was in the Army 27 years, and I grew up in a very rural environment. So I was not at a young age, really, people looked all like me. So I had no idea how to interact culturally with other people. I grew up as a Wells Lutheran, and my neighbors are all that, or they were Catholic or something like that, but they all look like me. Anyway, my point in saying that is when I went to the Army, it really provided me with an opportunity to interact with people from all walks of life. And what I found is that I was enlisted, so it was a gritty bunch of guys, and we were all men at basic training, and we didn't want to be treated differently because of where we came from or who or how we looked. But what we were concerned with is, did you have my back in the foxhole? Could you perform your duties and your tasks? I've got friends from all walks of life and from all races and cultures. As I mentioned to you earlier, Cindy Werner is a great friend and business partner of mine. And we think alike too, and we get along. And when I look at that, I think we come together better that way. When we look at each other's accomplishments and achievements, and we help one another, and we don't look at, people being from a race or from an urban environment or a rural environment. Let's look at what we can do to help one another as Americans. I love this country. I've been to other countries, and there's a lot of that goes on in those other countries. They identify by a caste system, or they identify by race, and the discrimination is terrible. And we're seeing that in this country. We really need to come together. We shouldn't pull apart and shouldn't be dissecting us by racial and ethnic and cultural things. That makes us stronger. That's what they used to call the melting pot. And now, like for example, foods. Let's take foods, ethnic foods. I love variety of different foods. And there's even discussion about, well, you shouldn't be doing that because you're appropriating culture or something. To me, that's what makes us so exciting to be a great country like this. There's so many different diverse things that we can all be a part of and learn from one another, and makes us stronger. So I think we need to work more on finding the commonalities and the strengths that we bring to the table, and then build together instead of tearing apart.
One other issue that's come up a lot at the Capitol and really around the state is property taxes. Wisconsin is known for having some of the highest property taxes in the country, which is probably why school districts and local governments can what they can levy is limited or capped. Obviously, they can pass a referendum to try to exceed that cap, but they have to pass the referendum first. Would you vote to keep the property tax caps in place, or do you think they should be eliminated?
Yeah, Mary, I think it's important that we, as much as we can, keep our taxes lower. And there's different ways we can do that. And I would be in favor of keeping the caps, or even, making, not be as high as they are. The reason that I say that is I think there's other ways we can go ahead and find ways to reduce or I should say have revenues. And one of them that, I've seen out there is every state has lots of property that's on the books, whether it be a commercial property, whether it be land that can be residentially built. Those are things that when they're sitting on the state's logbooks, they're taking up, number one, valuable revenue space in terms of you don't get taxes from the state when they're sitting on it. Also, the activity of, say, putting a business on there goes away. And when you have businesses, you have jobs, which creates revenue. So I'd be more in favor of looking at the, sale of state property. And then lastly, I think one of the things that we absolutely have started to go towards probably before the last election is sort of stalled out right now, and that is economic growth here in the state of Wisconsin. I believe Foxconn has not even begun to show us what they're going to do, and I believe there's other opportunities. Yeah, right now with COVID, things are sort of stalemated, but I believe we're going to come back real strong if we also, as a country, start decoupling from China and bring our pharmaceutical chain back to the United States. Wisconsin has some of the greatest research and development for pharmacy right here in Milwaukee. We really could see a benefit from that, and that would grow our budget, because when you have jobs and you have productivity, you have tax revenue. So that's what I would probably look closer at, to try and create more tax revenue and to offset budget deficits.
One of the things that Milwaukee has been pushing for to address budget shortfalls is a half-cent local sales tax, for example. Do you think that there should be alternative sources of revenues for local governments like the half-cent local sales tax, or do you think that should still be limited in terms of what they can do?
So from a small business owner's standpoint, when I look at having to charge that extra half-cent of tax, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but anytime you start to increase taxes, you start to depress economic activity. And so to me, if you really want to spur growth and bring in more tax revenue, you bring your tax costs down, because other cities can charge less, and if they can charge less, they can attract the business away from your city. So I would recommend we look at reducing taxes, be more business friendly, and open up the market to new enterprise, which again makes new jobs, creates new revenue for the city and municipalities. And there's just so many other options on the table, I think, other than adding to the liability of the taxpayer.
I think just one more tax question here, which is about roads. So Wisconsin has never found a stable way to pay for its highways. It's obviously a big topic of debate. Governor Evers suggested the gas tax increase. Would you vote to raise the gas tax if you're elected?
I would not. The reason I would not is, again, gas taxes can be manipulated, and if you add money to the gas tax, well, if I've got a state close by, and of course, Illinois is to our south, I don't know what their gas taxes are necessarily, but if we start raising that and their gas is cheaper, if you're down here in southeast Wisconsin and you happen to maybe be driving close to the border, well, you buy your gas down there, right? So I would say let's not do that, but let's look at how we do bidding in terms of the roads. I believe there's a lot of competitive capability that we can look at in both policy formation and operationally when we look at building a road, as well as regulations. It always takes seemingly quite a long time between saying, okay, we need to build a road out here on I-94, and it actually gets approved. Well, let's look at having a competitive bidding atmosphere instead of just having one or two big contractors who seem to always get the work. Let's open it up, and let's get these small businesses involved, and let's drive those costs down through competition. And you'll see a savings from that, but not only that, you'll see more robust activity in the small business community.
One question that I wanted to ask you, which I'll just jump ahead with that one, is public works projects. Do you think that when local governments are authorizing public works projects, should they give priority when it comes to bidding to Wisconsin-based companies? Do you think that local companies should get a leg up in the bidding?
Well, I think there's an advantage to doing that. I wouldn't say we should totally not look at companies from other locations, just because if you don't have that asset here in the state of Wisconsin, you got to get it from somewhere. And remember, our companies get work from the states around us too. So I would be prone to say yes as a first thought. Yes, let's try as much as possible to make sure Wisconsin workers and Wisconsin small business. I'm a small business here in Wisconsin. I really would like a shot at that business. But that, I think, then gets driven by the competitiveness of that business. If you're overcharging for your product, I run into this when I sell my products. If I'm overcharging, I don't get that business. So I got to find a way to make sure that I can sell at a profit margin that's legally approved. But not only that, it's going to also make me as competitive or more competitive. Maybe I add some services that my competitor doesn't have. But it's important, I think, for us to look first at home and then search beyond that to our neighbors, et cetera. Mary, I'm not hearing you. I'm not hearing you.
I must have muted myself. Do you think that businesses that follow all the prescribed coronavirus practices and recommendations should be immune from lawsuits if there's like an outbreak?
Yeah, I do believe I used to work in the insurance industry, and there are frivolous lawsuits, and there will be from coronavirus. And I do believe businesses and healthcare entities, police, municipalities, I think we have to provide some protection for that, because if we don't, we're going to see lawsuits that could, really decimate not just our private sector, but our municipal sector as well. And, we are in this together. I hear that saying a lot. So we gotta take the good with the bad, and we really have to, if someone was negligent, I think then we need to maybe look at that case by case. But when we were doing insurance claims, when I worked with American Family, a great Wisconsin company, we looked at each case by case. But I do believe we do need some restraint or some controls placed on frivolous lawsuits from the COVID.
One of the areas that's been hit hard by the pandemic is healthcare. And do you think the legislatures should make hospitals a higher priority in the next state budget?
Well, Mary, I tell you what, I was in the hospital back late February, and that's right as the COVID was kind of heating up. And when I went, I actually called, I made an appointment. They told me, well, come in, because I had a chest cold. I get these every year, and I was a bit concerned because I thought maybe I had the COVID. So I went in, and the clinic, it's a well-named one here in Milwaukee. You'd recognize the name. They had nobody in the lobby, and their workers were in the back just looking for things to do. I don't believe that the answer is to increase or have a stimulus, but let's get these hospitals back doing those elective procedures and seeing patients. That's going to be what gives them a prolonged pullout of this slump. Are there some areas of research or things like that we should support? Yes. But I don't believe that stimulus is going to be a long-term or even a good answer. It really needs to be learning how to, with this virus, operate and to protect those most vulnerable, to take care of our workers and keep them safe, but to continue operations. It's what we have to do so that our other diseases and other outlying issues that people have, whether it be cancer or whether it be some malady, they can get treatment for simultaneously while other people are getting treated for COVID. So I think that's the best answer. Let's get the hospitals back doing what they do best, taking care of people.
All right, well, we're just about wrapping up, but what do you think sets you apart? What do you think makes you the most qualified to represent the constituents of this Senate district?
Well, Mary, we talked a little bit about it at the beginning. I'm the only dairy farmer in the bunch. I understand the agricultural community. There is a portion of the district that's agricultural. I think I'm the only one that's got that background. Also, I grew up here in Wisconsin, a very spiritual, a Wells Lutheran, now I'm Missouri Lutheran. I believe in pro-life. I've been endorsed by both of the major pro-life entities here in Wisconsin. I'm a pro-personhood person. I think I'm the only one in that category. I'm also a 27-year military combat veteran. I served in Iraq for a year as a deputy division surgeon, and I planned the entire network of healthcare services for the multinational division south in southern Iraq, the 9 southern provinces. I have 2 children, and I have 6 grandchildren. I think I'm the only granddad. I might not be, I don't know. But I'm also a small business owner, and I've worked in both with the Pentagon and the military. I was the director of the National Disaster Medical System, which is an emergency response entity for the Army. And we control the 5 largest medical treatment facilities. And what we would do is we would help an affected area, whether it be a hurricane or a man-made disaster, evacuate hospitals that were in the affected area. So I've done that. I've been a CEO, I've been a COO, and now I own a business. And I work from dawn till dusk, and I've been in this fight for the conservative agenda for almost 30 years. And I've always been a conservative. I'm not coming or transitioning into this as a new thing. And I believe that with my the important things, as you can see in my sign here, I'm pro Second Amendment, I'm pro business, and I'm pro personhood. So those are the things that I think set me apart and will represent the district as well or even better than Senator Dave Craig, who was an exceptional senator and representative.
Do you oppose birth control, or what is your stance on that issue?
Yeah, so in terms of personhood, what we look at there is at conception. So I mean, I don't look at birth control as something that should be covered by taxpayers. I would never feel that we should be providing that. You can get access to that, and if you're someone who wants to pursue that and get it, then that's up to you as an individual. I don't support it. Like I said, I love kids, and the more the merrier. So.
All right. Well, I think we are out of time, but I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. And I'm sure more questions will come up in the future. But thank you very much. I know your primary is coming up, and you're probably pretty busy on the campaign trail, but we appreciate it.
Mary, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.